what was your reaction, your first reaction when you heard that the U.S. has decided to strike Iran on when we heard about it, which was on Saturday night?
Well, my first question is, why are we hearing about this from the United States and not Iran, right? We heard about it from Trump first, and Trump announced we've just done the strike, and U.S. media said it, but we had heard nothing from Iran. And generally, the way it happens is if a strike takes place, the strike is happening, the targets are hit, the government announces it's facing a strike, and then the Pentagon comes forward and says, yes, we did it. But in this case, we heard nothing from Iran. We heard nothing from Iranian media, nothing from international media. We learned about the strikes first from the United States, and I thought that was very, very peculiar. Something is off. That's what I immediately thought. I thought something is off. And then I started looking into the details of the attack, and it was very bizarre. I mean, Iran is saying that these strikes really had almost no impact. And then I listened to Donald Trump's speech, and he spoke about them in the most over-the-top, grandiose terms I'd ever heard, right? Speaking about the weapons and how magnificent they are, and saying that only the U.S. military could carry out such a strike, and it was the most amazing thing ever, and their nuclear program is completely destroyed, and all of this. And I heard Netanyahu saying this will go down in the history of the Middle East, and I'm thinking, what in the world is going on here? Something is just not right. And now we have the facts, and what Donald Trump is saying about his strikes and the reality of what he actually did don't match. It's one of the strangest U.S. attacks on a country I've ever seen. Did not follow the usual pattern at all.
Right. And since then, the Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said at a news conference in Istanbul on Sunday that Iran reserves all options to defend its security interests and people. He was unspecific about whether Iran would retaliate against the U.S. military assets in the Middle East, where more than 40,000 American military personnel are on bases and warships. What potential responses could we expect from Iran in the wake of this attack?
Well, Iran had already said a few hours before the attack that attacks on U.S. military personnel were fair game because the USA cooperated with Israel's attacks on Iran. That's they said beforehand. So that's not a new development, but I'm saying that U.S. military personnel could be a target. But what is interesting is that, at this point, the New York Times is confirming what was already said in Iranian media and other international media, which is that Iran moved all the nuclear material out of this site 3 days before the attack, and the strikes only they damaged the entrance and the exit tunnels in Fordow. Other sites weren't even impacted. This was a symbolic attack at best. These nuclear sites are underground, under, layers and layers of concrete. And to actually take out these sites would require more than simply bunker busters. It would require, quite a bit of precision and capability. And the USA just didn't do that. I mean, these strikes had almost no impact on Iran. But yet, Donald Trump is saying he got them. It was the most epic attack ever. U.S. media is echoing those claims, and the New York Times is confirming that what Iran has said here doesn't match reality. Now, I know that the foreign minister of Iran is now in Russia, has arrived in Moscow, and that Russia can play a very, very important role. Russia is offering that they will enrich uranium for Iran, that Iran will not enrich its own uranium. Russia has that capacity. Russia will will enrich the uranium for Iran, and then give Iran the uranium to use for peaceful nuclear energy. So Iran does not have uranium enrichment capacity. That is on the table at this point. That's being discussed. Now, if the USA could agree to that Iran would not enrich uranium at all, Russia would do it for them and then give them the uranium for their peaceful nuclear energy program. At that point, Iran wouldn't be enriching its uranium. And to say that Iran would have uranium enrichment capacity, which then they could eventually, down the road, possibly use to make their own nuke, it'd be a really big stretch to say that Iran was developing a nuclear weapon. That said, it's already a huge stretch. I mean, Iran, every nuclear site is monitored 24 hours a day by cameras, by the International Atomic Energy Agency. Iran has never been found in violation. Iran dismantled their entire peaceful nuclear energy program in 2015, and then they restarted it basically after the USA, backstabbed them on that deal and pulled out of that deal and killed Qasem Soleimani. And then they kind of, started to expand it again because what are they supposed to do? I mean, the USA didn't keep its end of the bargain, but that's possibly on the table, that Russia would become the source of enriched uranium for Iran. Iran wouldn't enrich its own uranium. Maybe that would be a deal that the United States could agree to. But I mean, at this point, we're in fantasy land. I think Donald Trump believes what he's saying. I think his advisors are telling him that he just completely ethically destroyed the Iran nuclear program. That did not happen. He struck, it looks like he shot some missiles at some empty concrete, at a concrete facility that was empty, and he damaged the entrance and exit tunnels to it. These strikes were completely meaningless. That's what Iran is saying. That's what the New York Times is confirming, but that's not, what U.S. officials are saying. What is more disturbing is Pete Hegseth, representing the U.S. Department of Defense, said that regime change is not on the table. And then Donald Trump has come out and said, well, actually, it might be on the table. It's not politically correct, but it might be on the table. The USA is sending completely mixed signals. I think Donald Trump has no idea what is actually going on. And I think he's surrounded by people that are feeding him disinformation. And that's very scary to think that the man who will ultimately make the decision is so out of touch with the reality on the ground in the conflict.
U.S. officials spent Sunday emphasizing the United States did not intend to enter an all-out war with Iran. President Trump raised the prospect of regime change in the country in a post on his social media site, which said if the current Iranian regime is unable to make Iran great again, why wouldn't there be regime change? How might this strike and then this sort of, that they're not at war, but regime change seems to still be sort of emphasized. How might this affect the regional dynamics in the Middle East?
Well, first of all, this kind of reminds me of how when the Ukraine war got going, the USA said that regime change in Russia was not on the table, but then Joe Biden said, oh, this man Putin can't stay in power. They're playing games here. They're sending mixed signals. They're sending threats in a way that they have deniability. That's what it looks like to me, is that, the official position is no regime change, but Donald Trump is tweeting different things, and that gives them a way to make this threat. This is a violation of the UN Charter. The threat of the use of force is a violation of the UN Charter. This is a war crime under international law to threaten to, overthrow a government. But regardless, that's what the United States is doing. For him to say that the Islamic Republic can't make Iran great again, they have. Prior to 1979, Iran was an impoverished, vassal of Western colonialism, and it's under the Islamic Republic that Iran became fully electrified. They've brought running water, electricity to the entire country. They built huge hospitals. The level of development in Iran is massive. And if you compare it to the U.S.-aligned Arab states throughout the region that have oil and sand and piles of U.S. weapons that they purchase while selling the USA their oil, Iran is far more developed, and living standards for Iran have massively increased. When I was in Iran, I met students from Nigeria who were Muslims in Nigeria who were interested in Iran and got on planes and studied there. I met students from Asia. I met students from Latin America, and that people all over the world go to Iran inspired by its revolution, inspired by what it's accomplished. Iran is part of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Iran is very economically tied in with Russia. The idea that the Islamic Republic hasn't had huge economic benefits to the population is absurd. And I believe that's ultimately why they're being targeted, right? Is that they broke out of the Western colonial system and they raised their people up. They engaged in economic development outside of the Western system. So, Trump doesn't know what he's talking about, but facts don't seem to matter in this dialogue. And there are a lot of very, very wealthy people who live in Southern California that fled at the time of the revolution. And as far as they are concerned, they feel that Iran is squandering its money supporting the Palestinians. They have kind of these are the elite who are in with the Shah. They view, they're Persians ethnically, and they view Arabs as an inferior race. And one of their grievances against the Islamic Republic is that Iran spends so much of its money supporting the Palestinians and supporting national minorities within Iran, like Persians, like Turkmen, like Kurds, the Islamic Revolution of Iran, Persia is not part of the name, right? Persians are an ethnic group. Iran is a country, and racism was outlawed by the Islamic Constitution. And, a very significant percentage of the population of Iran are not ethnically Persian. Prior to the Islamic Revolution, the Persians kind of had ethnic dominance, and most of the national minorities lived in extreme poverty. Iran has gone out of its way since the revolution to make clear that racism will not be practiced, to build up the national minorities, and also to support Lebanon, to support the Palestinians, to support, people throughout the region struggling against imperialism. That's something the Shahs and the kind of wealthy Persian elite that live in Southern California don't approve of. So when Trump is saying that he wants to, the regime can't make Iran great again or whatever, he's pandering to the kind of Persian nationalist elements that were deposed by the revolution and their grievances against the republic.
If we could go domestically, before he ordered the strike, President Trump did not seek permission from Congress, to which the U.S. Constitution grants the sole power to declare war. Many Democrats and some Republicans say the attack was a declaration of war and Trump acted illegally. Secretary of State Mario Rubio, however, said today that it was not a war against Iran. And Representative Thomas Massey, Republican of Kentucky, told CBS there was no immediate threat to the United States from Iran. What was it then when a country violates another country's airspace and drops bombs? How is Congress supposed to view this, and where are all those discussions likely to go?
Well, I noticed that Thomas Massey, he's been really on the forefront of opposing the U.S. strikes on Iran. He was the target of massive criticism by Donald Trump. But I noticed that there was massive support for him on the MAGA movement. And even though Trump was saying things like Thomas Massey is not MAGA, we don't need him, etc., a lot of MAGA voices were speaking up in defense of Thomas Massey and saying, no, America first does not mean Israel first. And that there is a strong feeling in the MAGA camp that what Trump is doing is kind of a betrayal of everything he campaigned on. And so we're going to have to see how this plays out. The argument of Thomas Massey is that, if you engage in a strike against a country, and if you're backing and cooperating with Israel in their strikes against a country, you're essentially at war with them. And the U.S. Constitution says Congress would have to authorize such a thing. And, when the USA invaded Iraq, there was a congressional resolution that enabled it. There isn't a congressional, resolution enabling this. So, he's got a strong argument on his side, and we're going to have to see how this ultimately plays out. But it seems like, unfortunately, there is a very, very strong support for what Trump is doing in Congress right now. On the left, the Squad, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, AOC, Bernie Sanders, they're opposing it. On the right, Marjorie Taylor Greene, some of the more MAGA Republicans, Thomas Massey, you have Rand Paul, who's opposing it in the Senate. But there is a very big chunk of the U.S. Congress that is in favor of what Trump is doing. So based on that, I don't know how far congressional opposition is going to go, but we shall see.
Of course, the Iranian ambassador to the UN called for an emergency meeting of the Security Council today. Of that, how do you think this incident, the strike by the U.S. on Iran, will influence U.S. relations with its allies in the region and geopolitically?
Well, that's the interesting thing. So the NATO allies are, the forces that are strongly in favor of the U.S. continuing its war in Ukraine, and they don't seem as enthusiastic about what Trump did. And France in particular doesn't agree with this, and that, the NATO countries, they're the ones that facilitated the Iran nuclear deal under the Obama administration. It was the P5+1 talks, and the five, included a lot of, countries that are NATO allies, like Britain, like France, and, so there's not agreement with the NATO countries about this. Trump kind of went on his own and, went in with Netanyahu, but he went against what a lot of the NATO allies would want. And this, again, has implications for the possibility of, is the USA going to continue funding this war in Ukraine when there's now a divide here? And that Trump seems to want to pivot toward opposing Iran. But yet again, I mean, we'll just have to see how this escalates, right? Again, there's the hope that Russia can facilitate some kind of deal that can lead to this all de-escalating. But at this point, Iran is saying, look, we have the right to strike back. So we're going to have to just see how this plays out.
Yeah. Just two more questions. In what ways could this escalation impact global oil markets and energy prices? Are we likely to see the Straits of Hormuz close? What do you think?
Yeah, well, oil prices are already rising, and yes, we are likely to see the Strait of Hormuz closed. And yeah, I mean, the oil prices are going to go through the roof, which in a way will benefit Iran because Iran is an oil exporting country. While they can't, sell oil to countries that are aligned with the United States, they can sell countries in the BRICS. And one of the rules of BRICS countries is you can't have sanctions on any country in the BRICS if you're part of the BRICS. And the BRICS economy is expanding constantly, and Iran can sell oil in the BRICS. Now, the other factor here is that, countries that want to continue trading with Iran are going to ignore U.S. sanctions, and they're going to have transactions that are not done in the U.S. dollar. And this is going to expedite something that Trump spoke about on the campaign trail, which is the U.S. dollar being devalued, right? There's going to be less transactions with the dollar. Coming out of Bretton Woods, we had the petrodollar, but that's long gone. Countries are purchasing oil with other currencies at this point, and it looks like this is going to lead to the further end, I guess. We've already left the petrodollar, but a further deterioration of the petrodollar. It's going to lead to the devaluation of U.S. currency, and it's going to lead to more countries, economically pivoting further from the United States because Iran is part of the BRICS, and to be part of the BRICS, you can't cooperate with sanctions on Iran.
Right, and just one other question. We saw people coming out on the streets today outside the White House in New York at Times Square, saying, no war with Iran, or stop the war, or do not go to the war with Iran. How important is the public response?
Well, it is very important. I was at the demonstration in Chicago that happened yesterday. It was mainly Palestine protesters who have come out, and they see the attacks on Iran as part of, what Israel is doing to the Palestinians as tied in with that. There were also a number of Iranian Americans. There were Muslims, and there were also just kind of your standard leftist anti-war protesters. And it was an interesting crowd. And I've heard that, since the strikes, there was a massive demonstration in New York City. I'll be in New York City, again soon, and I'll be seeing how that plays out. I was in downtown Chicago today, and, in the aftermath of the big demonstration that happened yesterday, there was another demonstration by Jewish folks, that are pacifists that were saying no strikes on Iran, de-escalate, and they were representing the people in Israel that are opposing Netanyahu. And apparently there's massive opposition to these strikes even within Israel. They feel it's putting Israel at risk. A lot of Israelis would like Netanyahu to focus on getting the hostages home, not intensifying the situation. And they see this as Netanyahu trying to protect his own career. So we're going to have to see how this plays out. But there is public opposition. The polls show the American people don't agree with this. The elected officials might agree with this, but the American people don't. On both sides of the fence, red states, blue states, the American people don't want war with Iran.
Right. Caleb Maupin, journalist, political analyst, thank you for joining us on the show today.
Sure thing.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Sure thing. Yep.
Thank you.
Since we spoke on Sunday, the first question I had asked you was, what was your take to what you saw that happened on Saturday night? Since then, Iran has retaliated by bombing the U.S. military base in Qatar. And today, Trump at a NATO summit has talked about, yes, we're going to have negotiations, and then pulling back and saying he's not worried about it because the nuclear facilities are destroyed. So where are we with all these discussions, do you think?
Well, it's clear that Donald Trump and his version of reality about what his strikes accomplished and the rest of the world's version of reality do not match. The New York Times and now even the U.S. Department of Defense Intelligence Agency all say that Iran's nuclear capacity was really not damaged and they were really not set back in any way at all. But Donald Trump and J.D. Vance and Benjamin Netanyahu seem to continue to stick to this claim that Iran's nuclear facilities have been epically destroyed. We heard Trump saying that, a new nuclear deal isn't even necessary, he says, because it'll take them years to get back to where they once were. That's just not the reality of the situation. The whole world can see that. So this is a very, very confusing thing. It's like Donald Trump is sticking with his reality. We also saw that the congressional briefing, the classified briefing that was supposed to go to members of Congress about what took place, has been canceled. So members of Congress aren't even going to be able to look at what took place. I mean, it's pretty obvious that Iran's nuclear capacity has not been knocked out at all. They moved the uranium away from the facilities 3 days beforehand, and the facilities themselves are like, miles underground with concrete on top of them. All that was damaged was the entrance and exit tunnels. And we have images that have been leaked from the WBAI report. Like, there has not been any real setback to Iran's ability to enrich uranium, which they have the right to do under the nuclear treaty. And so at this point, for Donald Trump to say, well, he doesn't even need to negotiate because they just can't come back. Like, what's going on? Like, what is he trying to get at? You almost wonder if Trump really does believe what he's saying, that they've told him, oh, yeah, we got him, we destroyed it, and other people are telling him the opposite. Or is Trump trying to give himself an out? And this is the way he can avoid going to war and attacking Iran again, because he can say, oh, I did this, I destroyed it, when that doesn't match reality, but he can just kind of ignore reality and pretend that to avoid having to go and carry out future strikes. This is a very, very odd situation where there's one version of reality that the world has and that even the bulk of the U.S. government has, and there's another version of reality that the White House has.
Right. So, but still, in the middle of all this is Iran, who can now decide whether to pull out from the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and whether it cooperates with the IEA and allows inspections. What are you hearing about those possible decisions?
Okay, well, here's the important thing to remember about that, right? The International Atomic Energy Agency, their job is to monitor nuclear sites in Iran and to make sure that they're conducted safely and in a non-military way. And as we know, Donald Trump, Saturday he shot a bunch of missiles at 3 different nuclear sites in Iran and destroyed them. Now, the fact that the International Atomic Energy Agency can't even come out and say that's wrong, and they didn't even pass a resolution saying you shouldn't blow up, you shouldn't attack a nuclear atomic energy site. That's huge, right? That's huge. And then on top of that, after 20 years, Iran has never once been found in violation of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, or never once been accused of breaking it. But now it basically is a way of supporting Trump's attack on Iran. They passed kind of a symbolic resolution saying that while Iran hasn't really broken the treaty, there's some technicalities, some safeguards they didn't follow. So rather than condemning Trump for attacking a site that it's their job to monitor, they turn around and they bended the rules quite a bit, and they found some fine print, and they found a way to condemn Iran symbolically. So at this point, Iran is saying, look, the International Atomic Energy Agency is not behaving in a bipartisan or a nonpartisan way. They're being blatantly biased. They didn't condemn a military strike on a nuclear facility. They bent the rules to finally condemn us after 20 years of saying we followed the rules, and they did that just to kind of give justification for Trump's strike. And so at this point, the Iranian parliament has voted to pull out, to suspend and not allow the International Atomic Energy Agency in Iran. And this is Iran sticking up for itself, right? If you have an international watchdog body that's monitoring nuclear sites, and then a major country attacks and blows up, and targets a nuclear site and blows up the entrance tunnel and does so without international permission and does so, in violation of international law, and this international watchdog body can't even come forward and say that's wrong. You have to do something as a country. You have to draw a line. Now, as far as withdrawing from the Non-Proliferation Treaty, that would be a really big deal, because at that point, Iran would be getting a nuclear weapon, right? That's the only reason they would do that. The only country that's ever withdrawn from the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty so far in history was North Korea, and they did it to get a nuclear weapon. I haven't heard talk of that. I have heard talk of the Iranian parliament did vote and pass a resolution to halt cooperation with the IAEA, to make a statement that this isn't okay. You can't not condemn someone for attacking us. You can't bend the rules to make it look like it's okay for them to attack us. This is getting ridiculous. The IAEA needs to stick true to its mission and stop playing politics.
Earlier in the week, we saw an extraordinary outburst by President Trump on Monday, and during NATO, he expressed his views about how he sees Israel and Iran. What are your interpretation of these remarks?
I mean, you have to look at this whole situation as the way it is being framed in American media is that Iran is a threat, that Iran is coming to get us, and that Iran is trying to get a bomb so they can blow up Israel. All the facts just point to the opposite of the reality. Iran has bent over backwards to accommodate the United States, and they've gotten slapped in the face for it over and over and over again. And right now, it seems that there is peace. The skies of Israel and the skies of Iran are open. Donald Trump is saying that this truce is going to hold. And Donald Trump is sticking to his story that Iran can't be a nuclear threat for at least years to come because of his epic strike. Let's hope that we stick to peace. But this is certainly a disturbing situation. I mean, people don't realize how close we came. They're now calling it the 12-day war. The 12-day war could have been the end of humanity in World War III very quickly. And I must say that the role of Russia in all of this has been astoundingly important. I mean, the Russian government was very key in making sure that Iran and the United States could communicate, though they're not speaking directly. Russia coming out and speaking up in support of Iran in international bodies. The foreign minister of Iran traveling to Russia to meet with the Russian president and all of this. Russia's role here can't be underestimated. They weren't a key party to the conflict, but Russia, has the respect of Trump on some level, and Russia is a key business partner and military partner of Iran. And so the role of Russia here in getting the shooting and the missiles to stop flying is really, really important. And that may not be obvious on the surface, but if you look at the details of how this conflict was stopped, you have to give credit to Russia, and in particular the Russian president.
Right. And going back to the topic you mentioned earlier, what do you make of the alleged leaked documents that show the lack of substantial damage to the 3 nuclear sites in Iran?
I mean, it appears to me that there are people. Look, there's been a widespread desire to get rid of Trump. Trump is not trusted. He's seen as being selfish, as not being a team player with the U.S. establishment. We saw the No Kings rallies in response to his military parades on his birthday and such. And now he is getting up and saying the opposite of the truth when it comes to the strikes he carried out on nuclear facilities. So it may be that forces within the establishment and within the military who don't like Trump are going to use this and use deception around this issue, use this to perhaps move ahead with some kind of impeachment move or something, right? I mean, it's becoming a talking point of the opposition to Trump, which is pretty widespread in the American political establishment, that Trump is not telling the truth here. And they may use this for their own political reasons. We have to recognize Trump is not telling the truth. I mean, he did not epically destroy Iran's nuclear facilities. The images have been leaked. I mean, you can look at those reports and you can't even see holes. I mean, you can't even see holes in the ground. These strikes were so minimal and so meaningless. So Trump is saying something that is so far the opposite of reality. It's pretty easy to get him on this, and I think any opposition political grouping would go after a leader who was saying things that are so contrary to reality.
And what about his base? Thomas Massie, Taylor Greene, Tucker Carlson, where are they now? They were opposed to anything that might have escalated to a war with Iran, but what are you hearing about his base support?
Now, Thomas Massie has been targeted by Trump. Trump has been, playing up the idea that Thomas Massie is no good, that MAGA doesn't need him. Marjorie Taylor Greene is maintaining, look, there's been no break between her and Trump. They're friends or whatever. Trump interestingly claimed that Tucker Carlson actually agrees with him, which is strange, right? Tucker Carlson did that whole interview with Ted Cruz, et cetera. But now Trump is saying, no, I spoke to Tucker Carlson. He actually agrees with me. It's very, very strange. I will say that the talking point among the pro-war and pro-Israel MAGA is they're trying to claim that all the people in the MAGA camp actually support Israel and that the anti-Israel wing of MAGA is just being boosted by Qatar. And these are all bots and trolls from Qatar. That is their talking point, that the Qatari monarchy and Qatar is just, manipulating the internet, and that's why it looks like Trump supporters don't support Israel. Well, that's not the reality, right? And, I mean, if you go into any conservative platform, even some that are quite pro-Israel, you'll see the comment sections full of people criticizing it. And if you talk to your rank-and-file MAGA, a lot of them, do have a little bit of a bias. I would say they think Muslims are terrorists. They think Muslim people are foreign or whatever. But they also don't see Israel and protecting Israel and getting into a war with Israel as in America's interest. And that is pretty standard among your typical MAGA. You have a layer of people like Nikki Haley, like the U.S. ambassador to Israel, who used to have a show on Fox News, Mike Huckabee. You have a layer of people that are just really solidly on Israel's side. They're evangelical Christians, et cetera. But you have a lot of people in the MAGA camp that maybe they don't like Muslims, maybe they don't like Iran, but they really don't care about Israel's security enough that they want to get involved in a conflict. And what Marjorie Taylor Greene and Tucker Carlson and Thomas Massie have said is pretty reflective of a lot within the MAGA camp. And Laura Loomer and certain other voices that have been kind of appointed to be the main spokespeople for MAGA, they are trying to downplay the reality of what public opinion is on their own side.
Okay, Caleb, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much. Your insights, as always, are invaluable, and we're grateful that you can come on the show.
Sure thing. Always a pleasure.
Thank you.